Hello, welcome back to our 9th week of the Jerusalem Science Contest. And this week, your exam is going to be on chapters 22 and 23. That's the science of fiber production. And 23 is organically grown products. It's going to be a little bit maybe repetitious because we've already talked a little bit about organic produce. So, but nevertheless, that chapter just came up here, so that will be on this week's exam as well. The following week, however, which will be my last lecture, we're going to be looking at chapters 24 and 25. That's new directions in agriculture and energy from agriculture. And there, my final lecture will be on the subject of where I see agriculture going in the 21st century. So this week, it being a Shmittah year, I think it's appropriate for me to say something about Shmittah. And I'm not a rabbi, of course, and Rabbi Weiner, who is much more learned, certainly, on the subject than I am, will have a lot more to say about Shmittah. But I'd like to, at this point, just give some scientific background and some scientific perspectives on the subject. So, call this talk Shmittah, Why It's Good for the Land to Lie Fallow. And there are a number of reasons. Of course, we could just look at it from the perspective of what it tells us in the Torah. It's a commandment. We're commanded to do this. But what other reasons might we have if it weren't a commandment? Well, first of all, I have to interject here a word from our sponsor. And I say that you may have purchased it and you may work it, but ultimately the land belongs to Hashem. So as far as Shmittah goes, we're commanded to give the land its Sabbath. We know that Hashem created the heavens and the earth and everything in 6 days, and He rested for a day. And it's also important for the land to, after it's produced for 6 years, to also have its rest. So this is a Shabbat for the land, and it's necessary for the land to rest for a number of reasons, and we can say scientific reasons as well. And we'll see that in a moment. So I want to look at a little bit of the history of, not so much the history of Shmittah, because Shmittah, of course, goes back to the Torah, but the idea of letting the land lie fallow. So that's kind of what Shmittah is all about. But fallow is a pretty old practice. It probably predates the Torah. And it's still in practice by a lot of cultures in many different lands, but it's not practiced the way that we Jews practice Shmittah, because when land is allowed to lie fallow, there are still certain things that can be done to the land which are forbidden during the Shmittah period. So just a couple things that I wanted you to see, that there are places now still on the face of the earth where when there are certain populations, low density populations, in areas where there's abundant forest cover, there are peoples, indigenous peoples, that use shifting cultivation practices that have very long fallow periods. So they may grow for a year or for several years, and then they may have fallow periods that can range from anywhere from up to a decade to as long as 60 years. In some parts of Asia, there's a process known as slash and burn cultivation that's used. So when rice and corn and cassava and taro are grown in these areas, after the harvest is over, then the remaining greenery that's still there is slashed, it's cut down, and it's burnt. And the burnt material still adds nutrients back into the soil. So that's a procedure that's used. And there's another procedure which it still involves the slashing part of it, but not burning. So in Papua New Guinea, what they do there is they cut the forest vegetation but instead of just burning it, they'll take the leaves and they'll lay it along the contour. And then what this does is it prevents erosion from occurring by laying that down. And also the decaying leaves will release nutrients back into the soil. So the idea of fallow here in all these things is to give the land a rest, but also to put nutrients back into the soil. There's another process known as lay farming, and this alternates planting of grain and other cash crops with fallow periods. So during the fallow, you could, for instance, grow hay, or you could put the land out for pasture. Now, you could do that same thing, put the land out for pasture, I assume, during Shmittah, but of course you would not be able to plant and grow hay during that period of time. So it's a little bit different. And the other thing is that the use of cover crops, and I'll talk about that in a second, that achieves many of the same kinds of benefits. So what cover crops are, these are things that will be planted usually in the late fall or early winter, and these are plants that are going to add nutrients back into the soil. They're not cash crops in this case usually, they're just planted to actually enrich the soil, and then they're going to be plowed over, and when it's time to plant, the soil will be somewhat enriched, and the following growth year, then whatever cash crop would normally be planted would be planted at that time. And cover crops are used quite frequently in sustainable agriculture. What specifically is required for Shmittah, or what's required, what is forbidden? So the things that are actually forbidden are plowing, planting, pruning, and harvesting. So during the Shmittah year, you may not do any of those activities. However, under certain circumstances, you're allowed to water, fertilize, weed, spray, trim, and mow. But you can only do this as a preventative measure. So I guess what that means is, if it looks like your plants, your crops, or whatever, your trees are going to be damaged because there's just too many weeds, or the tree is showing signs that it's lacking certain essential nutrients, then it's permitted to put those things down if it's a very, very dry spell. Rather than having your trees die, it's permitted to water the trees. But what you can't do is any of these activities if it's going to make the trees or other plants actually have their growth improved. That's not permissible. Now, whatever fruit grows by itself, and there, of course, if you got a tree and you don't do anything to the tree is still going to produce fruit, and that fruit has a special category. It's said to be hefker, which means that it's ownerless. So even though the farmer owns the land, he doesn't own that fruit. Now, he may pick the fruit and use it for his family, and he's only allowed to pick as much as he's going to need for a particular meal or for a particular day, and the rest, and other people may come by, and the Torah specifies this so that the poor may have a way of actually coming in and being able to get sustenance during this year. So anyone that comes by is allowed to pick that fruit. There are even sometimes the fruit will be picked and actually laid out in an area where people can come by and take it. But again, they're required to only take as much as they need, not to take a lot more. And of course, none of that fruit can be sold by anyone. It has to be for individuals to use for themselves. Now, vegetables that come up out of the ground by themselves are sefachim. This means that these vegetables, whatever grows out of the ground, whatever grows by itself without any kind of cultivation, these things have to be uprooted, and they may not be consumed by anyone. Now, this seems to be a post-Torah kind of thing. It's a rabbinical kind of thing because the rabbis realized that what might happen is that people might start throwing seeds into the ground so the vegetables would grow, and then they would say, well, these vegetables just came up by themselves. when in fact they didn't. So in order to be really stringent in observing Shmittah, the rabbis decreed that these things were all considered to be sefachim, and no one was allowed to eat them. So these are the actual requirements of Shmittah. Now, these are some of the things that Shmittah does for the environment. So even though it's a commandment, there still is some practical reason for doing these kinds of things. So one of the things is that nutrients are going to be added back to the soil during this process. Now, it's not the same as if you were to start growing something and then cutting it down and plowing it under, but whatever it is that's being grown and after the produce is removed, that material is still going to biodegrade, and it's going to go back into the soil. So it will start adding essential nutrients back to the soil. Now, one of the nice things about Shmittah, and of course there are other, for instance, even if you're doing just organic types of growing, you're not going to be using pesticides and fertilizers. But this is a chance for the land to recover from the fact that you were using pesticides and fertilizers for a six-year period. So they're not being applied during that period of time. Pesticides, probably not at all. And if there is any fertilization, as I said before, it's only done as a stopgap measure. So you're probably going to be using very, very little of these kinds of things. So that means that when it rains, there's going to be less agricultural runoff, and that means that there will be much less of a tendency for this runoff to get into streams and into the water and pollute the water. This also will cause a reduction of soil erosion, again, because as these materials come up naturally, even though they're not going to be used, if we take them out, if we pull them out of the ground as is required, we're going to leave them there, and they're still going to go back into the ground, and that the fact that they're acting as a kind of a soil cover in that sense means that that's going to reduce erosion to some extent. It also will cause conservation of soil moisture. Now, whenever you've got insects that feed on a specific crop, if you don't plant that crop, and this is one of the reasons why people use crop rotation, but in this case, Shmittah naturally is going to disrupt the life cycle of harmful insects and other kinds of pests, because they're not going to be able to find whatever it is that they would normally be feeding on. It's not going to come up that year. So that, at least in terms of the vegetables, that again is going to be helpful for the environment. This also increases biodiversity, because now there's going to be a lot more produce that's available for animals. You're also not allowed to fence off your property and prevent animals from coming in and eating your fruits and vegetables. So that was something that a farmer might normally do, but during the Shmittah, animals are going to be allowed to come in and do that, and that's going to encourage more kinds of animals and a greater level of biodiversity. Food will also be grown and eaten locally in a Shmittah year, and that means that I guess some food probably is still imported into Israel, but nevertheless, the fact that farmers are now not taking their crops and bringing them distances to market, again, that's going to help the environment to a certain extent. There are a couple techniques that apparently don't violate Shmittah, because Shmittah really has to do with things that are in the ground. So we can use two techniques. One of them is probably dates back, I think, to the 1930s, and the other one, that's the second one, hydroponics, which uses plants that are rooted, that are not rooted in the soil, but their roots are immersed in water. And then there's another technique called aeroponics, which has probably only been around for the last maybe 30 or 40 years. And here the roots of the plants are in the air. They're not immersed in a liquid solution at all, but they're constantly being misted or sprayed with a solution. And finally, and this one is a little controversial, greenhouse growing. So you can grow. Some authorities say that you can grow in a greenhouse as long as you're growing as long as the greenhouse floor is covered with a thick material, and you may even be able to grow in pots if you have this thick material, kind of like a thick plastic or a metal covering on the floor, so that there's no there's no contamination from the earth. So this last one, as I said, not all post-scheme permit this activity, but there are some that do. But it seems to me that from what I've read, that aeroponics certainly would be permitted. There might be some that would say you can't do it, but I think in general it's allowed, and I think it is done in Israel to some extent, and hydroponics as well. Let's look at these techniques a little bit closer. In aeroponics, these are some of the advantages. So the roots are, as I said before, are left exposed to the air. This means that there's not only more oxygen in the rhizosphere, that's the area right around the roots, there's not only more oxygen, but there's also going to be more carbon dioxide available, because these things are not in the soil. These gases don't have to diffuse through the soil. They're not going to get trapped in soil particles, and so there's much greater likelihood that they're going to be absorbed directly by the root hairs. Water, along with dissolved nutrients, is applied in the form of micro droplets, and this allows a greater surface area to volume ratio for uptake of both the water and the dissolved nutrients. So this is done in the form of, could be a continuous misting or spraying of these naked roots. And studies have shown that root growth is greatly improved using this method. And I had some pictures. Unfortunately, I couldn't get any really good ones, but they were showing roots that had been grown using conventional methods versus aeroponics. And the roots, to me, look like they were 50% longer than the roots that were grown conventionally. I already mentioned the fact that you've got 100% access to carbon dioxide for photosynthesis. These kinds of things are going to mean that your application is going to be sterile, because you can sterilize your equipment, you can sterilize your spraying apparatus, you can use sterile water, you can use whatever materials that you're going to be putting into the water can be sterilized, and this ensures disease-free cultivation. We don't have to worry about bacteria or viruses. Whatever we're going to grow is, and we certainly don't have to worry about insects or other kinds of things, or fungal infestations on our plants. Precise monitoring of nutrient uptake, because we can deliver a certain amount of nutrient per hour in using these spraying techniques. The plants produce faster and they have much greater yields. As a matter of fact, I saw something that was really quite remarkable. It said that compared to conventional agriculture, where you get something like 0.4 pounds of produce per, I think it was square foot, you could get up to 30 pounds in a square foot using aeroponics. And the produce that is produced in this fashion has a greatly extended shelf life, so that conventional produce might have a shelf life of 1 to 2 weeks, and aeroponic produce can have a shelf life of 3 weeks. Hydroponics, similar kind of situation, has some of the advantages of aeroponics, and in some cases maybe not quite as good. I think the aeroponic method is probably has certain advantages. There are a couple different ways of doing hydroponic applications. One of them is known as static solution culture, and here are the you've got containers of your nutrient solutions. They could be in mason jars or plastic buckets, and the solution could be gently aerated, or in some cases it's just not aerated at all. And nevertheless, it's possible to grow plants with very, very little outside interference this way. Continuous flow culture requires a little bit more sophisticated type of setups. You can adjust nutrients and temperatures, and you have you're using a large tank that has flowing water. And there's another variety of this. It's known as a nutrient film technique, and this uses a shallow stream of water in which the nutrients are flowing past the bare roots. So the roots are maintained in a watertight, thick, what's known as a root mat, and the upper surface of the roots themselves are still exposed to the air. But these techniques still are allowed during Shmittah. One of the concerns is during Shmittah is the farmer himself, because the farmer normally that year would have had a certain amount of income from his produce. Now he's told that he has to give his produce away, and he can only use whatever he can grow for himself. And the idea of Shmittah here really is that the farmer shouldn't be working. He should also be getting a sabbatical year. It's a year off for him to do other things, like study Torah, for instance. But there are some ways that if the farmer is observing Shmittah, that other people can help him out. So one of the things that you can do, and this is kind of a little legal trick here, is he can't sell his fruit. However, he can be hired by someone else to pick his fruit. So let's say I know that I can take his fruit for free, but I don't want to go onto his property. Maybe it's a certain distance away, and I don't want to go out there and have to do my own picking. My wife likes to go out sometimes and pick her own apples. And I always say to her, why are you picking apples when in fact you can get nicer apples at the store and they actually wind up costing less money? And her answer to me is because it's fun. Anyway, for those of us that don't like to pick our own fruit, what we can do is we can actually hire the Shmittah observant farmer to pick the fruit for us. So this way, what we can say is we're not hiring him in order to, we're not buying his fruit, but we're hiring his labor. That's what we're paying for, his labor. So in this way, the farmer can still get some income. There's another legal maneuver that people use, which is known as heter mechira. And in this particular, and again, there are some poskim that say this is not something that we really approve, but it's still used, and there are a lot of people, I guess, that do use it. And the idea is that the farmer sells his land to a goy. He's really, what he's doing, he's setting up a contract. I almost liken this to selling your chametz during Pesach. You know, you sell it to a goy, you're going to buy it back at the end of Pesach. Well, at the end of the Shmittah year, the goy is going to sell you back the land. But the goy then, the advantage that he gets out of it is he can then work the land for a profit. And it's possible, it's permissible, I guess, then to buy the produce of that land from the goy because it's no longer, and again, you know, there are different opinions about this. But I think that for most people, there are also people that object to this just because when you're talking about the goy in Eretz Yisrael, you're talking about Arabs. You might be talking about Palestinians. You might be talking about people who really want to kill you. And you know, there might be an objection to actually helping these people. So there are a lot of other questions that come in with this particular practice. But another thing that could be done, and is being done, and I see even in some of the schools where I teach, there have been posters that were put up on the wall, and there are funds that you can contribute to that will enable the farmer to remain financially solvent during Shmittah. In some cases, you're actually buying part of his land. It's a similar kind of thing. You're giving money so that you own, and you're actually participating in the mitzvah of Shmittah by doing this. So these, I think that's all I have on this. This was a fairly short lecture, and I think that everybody will probably be happy about that. But the next lecture will be somewhat longer. So again, we'll have the 25-question test, and I will see everybody next week. And thank you once again for your attention.